Short stories from Japan, accompanied by animation. Reading Japan. The Masked Funeral by Hayashi Jyouji. In the previous chapter, this short story takes place in the near future, when humans have figured out how to coexist with the coronavirus, which becomes a fixture in society. The protagonist is Kagawa Misaki, who has returned to his hometown for the first time in 2 decades to get his deceased parents' affairs in order. There, he takes a job attending a funeral as a proxy wearing a mask. The deceased at the lavish funeral hall turns out to be Kugayama Shintaro, who once bullied him. Memories of being bullied flood back, along with feelings of outrage.
If all he did was flush your lunch down the toilet, you got off easy. He would beat people up, make sure not to leave any telltale signs of his handiwork. Or he would push people down the stairs when no one was looking. His abuse was not driven by bitterness or hate. In retrospect, if I had to guess, he preyed on the weak simply because he could. Regardless, Kugayama's abuse was never addressed, perhaps because no one ever really confronted him. If you went to a teacher, they would dismiss you with an incredulous, "Kugayama would never do anything like that." What's worse, it was not uncommon for a teacher to reprimand you in response. After all, you were attempting to sully the reputation of an upstanding student. I knew all of this, of course, because I, myself, had been one of Kugayama's targets. Although we weren't even in the same class, he would hunt me down and attack me when there was no one around. On one occasion, he pushed me down the stairs, leaving me with a broken wrist and ankle. I still suffered from lingering pain in my foot. But even on that occasion, Kugayama had received no punishment. As he put it, "Why would I do something like that to Kagawa? The guy's not even in my class." No student or teacher would doubt the word of the school's #1 student. My own parents even accused me of lying about it. That was an especially hard pill to swallow. I suppose my parents couldn't afford to go against the Kugayama family in an area where they had such control. But when they dragged me over to the Kugayama house and made me kneel down with them to beg for forgiveness, I felt a murderer's impulse, not toward my tormentor, but toward my own parents. My parents, who had no qualms about making their son, who was wearing a cast, prostrate himself. As far as I was concerned, that was the moment they ceased to be my mother and father. Following that ordeal, Kugayama left me alone for a while, but only until the heat was off. He never did anything like push me down the stairs again, but instead, he doubled down in hurling abuse and spreading nasty rumors about me. That quickly became too much to bear. By that point, I'd learned my lesson. The teachers and other adults around me wouldn't believe anything I said. After being injured that time, I started carrying around a voice recorder. That way, if anything happened, I would have audio proof of his verbal abuse. It wasn't long before I had evidence against him. And Kugayama didn't have the slightest clue that I was planning my counterattack. But there was one thing I hadn't counted on. I wasn't the only victim with a voice recorder. It turned out that a female student had also been recording Kugayama's abuse. She bypassed the school and went straight to the school board. I don't know what was on those recordings, but I do know that she ended up killing herself. Her parents disappeared from town, and Kugayama himself escaped punishment of any kind. The incident made it clear to me that I was powerless to fight back. My only recourse was to get away from that place. In my mind, he was unassailable, an unbeatable opponent. Yet here I was, still standing. He had been beaten after all. According to the attendees, it had been a car accident. Still, the scale of the service was a testament to how influential Kugayama had been in our hometown. The hall was lined with folding chairs, albeit spaced out in accordance with pandemic protocol. That meant the seating capacity was about half of what had once been allowed. Half of the attendees were forced to stand at the back of the hall. Other than the seats reserved for family and relatives, most of the chairs were filled by proxies. At my client's behest, I went around greeting other attendees using name tags as my guide. I simply moved from person to person and bowed my head. I was mostly exchanging bows with other proxies. When they bowed, their masks displayed the tops of their clients' heads. I imagined that my client was also bowing at home in front of their camera. It was proper etiquette for a proxy to pretend not to hear anything a client said through the mask. Nevertheless, I gathered that Kugayama had built a wide network of contacts. And apparently, the sales channels and markets that he had developed were the reason why many of the town's residents were able to earn a living. Apart from Kugayama's mourning widow and children, there seemed to be tension in the air in the family seating area. A heated discussion was going on about who would be Kugayama's successor. I had placed myself within earshot of the family at the request of my client, not of my own volition, but it meant I would be paid extra, so I had no reason to refuse. For the longest time, I had experienced vague daydreams about exacting revenge upon Kugayama. But I had never seriously considered returning. This meant that revenge had been confined to the realm of fantasy. But now that I was here at his funeral, I found my hatred for Kugayama himself eclipsed by my disgust toward the attendees. There had been plenty of signs pointing to the truth, that Kugayama was a bully and a tormentor, but those around him had always looked away. After all, as long as they remained bystanders, they could avoid involvement. If, when I was growing up, even one of the adults around me had faced up to reality, if just one person had made an effort to steer Kugayama in the right direction, both of our lives could have turned out very differently. That's when it dawned on me that nothing had changed. Among the non-proxy attendees, I spotted a few faces I knew from school, most of them members of Kugayama's old entourage. From what I could tell, the old high school hierarchy still governed their social interactions. It was as if time had stood still in this town. Before I knew it, it was my turn to offer incense at the altar. In the past, there would be a portrait of the deceased person on display. Nowadays, they had a large screen showing a slideshow of photos and short videos of the person's life. It was only natural that Kugayama was able to find a partner in marriage. The videos showed him playing the role of a good husband alongside a beautiful, happy-looking woman. I recognized her as his high school girlfriend. I bowed to the screen and then to the bereaved family. His wife looked just like she did in high school. Next to her were 2 teenage girls. The girls bowed back, a testament to good upbringing and a reminder that Kugayama had been kind and good-natured when he saw fit. His widow and daughters had likely only known him as a gentleman, a man of character. Then something hit me. If the relationships in this town had remained unchanged all these years, surely that meant there were people here whom Kugayama had been trampling on right until the end. But was Kugayama really the sole perpetrator here? Maybe he'd struggled with emotional issues, and being surrounded by passive bystanders had consistently robbed him of the realization that he was the cause of so much anguish. If it meant they could keep enjoying the comforts of their everyday existence, there was no reason to acknowledge the misery of those who suffered, or their own roles as tormentors. If it weren't for my mask, the other attendees would have seen the color drain from my face. All this time, my hate had been misdirected. It wasn't Kugayama's abuse that I'd fled from. It was this tedious, stagnant town. From behind my mask, I could hear my client offering his condolences to the widow and children, completely oblivious to my anguish. His words suggested the Kugayamas were loved very much by those around them. Then again, there were those bickering about succession right in front of the bereaved. There seemed to be very few people offering any sort of real comfort to his immediate family. After burning incense at the altar, I returned to my seat. I had figured out how I would get my revenge that only I could exact. As a way to honor the life of the deceased, funerals had a system where you could upload pictures, videos, and audio clips to a cloud service. It allowed mourners to share their memories of the deceased with one another. But the cloud service was only accessible to certain people. It was set up so that those given permission from the host of the funeral could upload. The same was true for their proxies. My client was one of those with permission, and from what I could tell, he had something ready to upload. These days, it wasn't uncommon for clients to upload and display their memories of the deceased directly on the surface of the proxy mask. During that window of time, I had access to the cloud. And I also had in my possession my old audio recordings of Kugayama's verbal abuse. I could easily use my client's access to upload the files. I summoned my smartphone AI and queued up my files so that they would be uploaded automatically when my client started uploading his. I imagined the panicked faces when those who had only known Kugayama's good side found out his dirty little secret. His reputation would be shot to pieces. And because the recordings also contained the voices of teachers and other onlookers, it would bring to light just how hypocritical the people in this town were. And the whole charade would be exposed by me, Kagawa Misaki, a guy who, in Kugayama's eyes, had been less than human, a man who could only exist in his hometown under the guise of a mask. A moment's reflection made it obvious that my plan was pure folly. It would be easy to track down who had uploaded the files. I could already see the update on my temp worker record: caused a disturbance at a funeral service on account of a personal grudge. That would severely limit my job prospects moving forward. I'd no longer be able to secure employment as a funeral proxy. And the kind of high-paying hourly jobs that required dependability would no longer come my way. So, in a sense, I was signing my own death warrant. But it would mean this stagnant town would be forced to reckon with its own hypocrisy. If I could tear down this facade of a tranquil community, my revenge would be complete. My audio files had successfully been uploaded to the cloud. I waited for all hell to break loose, but the service ended without so much as a hiccup. On my way out, the widow bowed deeply, not only to my remote client, but also to me. We appreciate your staying to the end of this memorial service for my late husband. No doubt he was a complete stranger to you. I left the funeral hall without revealing my connection to the deceased, overcome with self-loathing and confusion. When I got home, I checked my phone. My account showed that I'd already been paid the rest of my fee for the day. So, had my audio clips simply fallen on deaf ears? The files had been deleted a little while earlier by the client, but I was yet to hear anything from him. The counter indicated that my files had been downloaded a considerable number of times. At least half of the attendees appeared to have listened to the recordings. Yet the pretense of an uneventful funeral had prevailed. It finally sunk in. My audio clips, everything, it was all pointless. The people of this town had been bystanders the whole time, which was just another way of saying they had been aware of Kugayama's abuse. I was under the misapprehension that I had exposed Kugayama's darker side. But to the locals, that was old news. Their original decision to look away was what had made them bystanders in the first place. And today, yet again, they had chosen to turn a blind eye to an inconvenient reality. They had chosen to remain frozen in time. I felt all the strength drain from my body as I slumped to the floor. And in that moment, I had an epiphany. No longer would I live my life shouldering the problems of my hometown. I deleted the audio files from my phone and signed up for the next class in my job training. From now on, I would live my life the way I wanted to, for my own sake. Banish the ghosts of the past for good. Only then would I be able to say that I had left this town behind once and for all. Someone once said that a funeral is a ceremony where we can settle the past so that the living can move on to new beginnings. That's exactly what today's funeral had been like. I discovered that even my hatred for Kugayama had completely melted away. And so it was that at last I could say, from the bottom of my heart, Kugayama Shintaro, thank you for dying.